Okay, so now I'm inviting the panelists to come off mute and to turn their cameras on, please.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to have you all with us this evening. We are very, very pleased to be here actually on this Wednesday evening. We were just discussing that there is all multitudes of weather, so I always feel it's a very British thing to do, just to acknowledge this. But yeah, thank you for finding your way to us on an early autumn evening. So in a moment, I'm going to ask the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. But just before we get there, we do like to start our webinars with a little bit of a sort of health check, really, I guess, just to invite you to take care of yourselves this evening as we go through this discussion. It really is okay to pop off at any point if you feel that perhaps the discussion has gone as far as is right for you just for this evening. We do record, as Antalya explained earlier, so you can always come back to it and listen to it as we go. We have a Q&A function. Now on my screen, it's two little bubbles, little speech bubbles. And I know that sometimes it looks different depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC. But if you would like to ask us a question or comment on the discussion that we're having, or just raise an observation, please feel free to pop your questions into that function. We won't be checking the chat. We'll only be using the Q&A function. So if you could use that, that would be great. So without further ado, I'm going to go around in order clockwise on my screen, actually. So I'm going to ask Richard to start us off just by, I don't know, those of you who are old enough will know Cilla Black and Blind Date, but I do a bit of a what's your name and where'd you come from?
Yeah, hi there. My name is Richard Butler. I'm from London, and I'm a partner of someone who's suffered with eating disorders for a number of years. So hopefully I can give some insight and some help to people in a similar position to I was.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening, Richard. Next up, I have Debbie.
Hi, thanks, Kerry. So my name's Debbie, and I set up a not-for-profit organisation that many of you on the session will likely have heard of, Wednesday's Child. And we support individuals and families affected by eating disorders, and also help to train healthcare and other community professionals that might come across people that are experiencing issues with eating disorders.
Thank you, and thank you, Debbie, for finding time to join us. And Karen.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Karen Carberry. I manage the family therapy service at Orri. I'm a consultant family and systemic psychotherapist. Sounds like a very long title, doesn't it? But it means I talk to couples and families about their interaction with eating disorders, really, and find a way through with them. And we have a very nice small team that's developing because we are quite busy here.
Yeah, Karen is a very busy woman. So thank you for finding the time, Karen, to come and join us this evening. Really appreciate it. So I guess really, first of all, just starting off with a bit of context setting, why did we feel that it was important to be having this conversation this evening? Why is it important for us to think about the people who are alongside those who are directly struggling and suffering with the eating disorder? And I think probably, from all of us sitting here today, what we recognize is that eating disorders, they don't just happen to the person who is directly experiencing the eating issue, that they have a significant impact on all of those people around them. And therefore, there are certain areas of support that can be needed, discussions that can be had, ways that support can be offered, that we really wanted to kind of come together and think about with you all this evening. And I'm going to just start off, Karen, if I can, with you, just to think a little bit about, from your perspective, why is it important that we think about the people who are around those who are suffering?
Oh, people don't come to us in isolation, really. They are part of a wider network, whether it's family or a partner or friends who become part of their family, and also there is in the family, there are sort of rules that people grow up with around food and conversations that they grow up with around food, whether it's sort of cultural or just relational. So they bring the families and couples, they bring an extra dynamic, an extra perspective, really, that we are able to think about with the person who suffering from eating disorder, so they don't feel that you know, we're just targeting them, but it's a family problem, it's a family issue, and we really do need to think about, you know, their loved ones in terms of how can they contribute to not just coming alongside, but also unearthing some of those difficulties. Those difficulties sometimes are not talked about for decades, that then we see manifested in an eating disorder. You know, it's what is the function of the eating disorder? It could be one of those underlying issues that aren't talked about. Yeah. And so, you know, the being able to have couples to come alongside each other and talk about those most difficult areas of interaction is really important. And it can feel quite nerve-wracking. You know, it could be that they wanted to do this for a very long time, but didn't feel confident enough to do it or safe enough to do it. And so having conversations with a third party provides a bit more safety, that they can take risk in those conversations and be able to ask for what they need. Both sides ask for what they need, and also get some clarification about what it is they can and can't do.
Yeah, thank you. And Debbie, if I can just ask you, I guess, just sort of starting to think a little bit about the kinds of difficulties, I guess, that people may experience, or the struggles that they may have. What do you notice when you meet with you know, loved ones or those who are sort of supporting, looking after people? What do you sort of commonly see?
It can be such an array of different emotions and experiences that people bring to the table, because sometimes people will come to us, as we all know, that eating disorders can create an incredible like resistance and denial in that person themselves. So sometimes we'll have that parent or the spouse or partner come to us themselves and say, look, he doesn't want to deal with their own eating disorder, but I can't cope. I need to understand this illness. I need support. And in those cases, you know, we say it's very much like, you know, the oxygen mask. You know, you put the oxygen mask on and you look after yourself so that you can help look after the loved one. And if at the very least we can help them through that stage, then that's, you know, that's really important. And in other cases, it might be that people come to us and they just say, in any other thing that's come up with our family, with our children, we have felt that we could go to the cousin, the auntie, the mum, the dad, the neighbour, the best friend that I've got, you know, someone I've known many, many years. There's something about eating disorders that I think for some people makes it hard to find that space to talk and seek support. You know, the stigma and shame doesn't ought to exist, but I think for some people it does. It's not something we naturally feel we can say, hey, my wife, my girlfriend, my husband, my son, my daughter has an eating disorder, because there's this fear that you're going to be judged for it or kind of scrutinized for it, rather than saying my child has a broken leg, my child has cancer. So I think in those situations, the need to come and seek family support and carer support and just support and a little bit of insight, because sometimes people say, you know, the classic one I hear so much is, I don't understand it. She's so intelligent. She's grade A at school. I mean, excuse me, you know, how can she possibly be, you know, doing this to herself? I mean, what have we done wrong? I hear all those things, and it's kind of being able to enable them to be in that space where they can open up and recognize, oh, this stuff isn't crazy. This stuff I'm saying is being experienced by lots of other people behind lots of front doors all over the country.
Absolutely. No, thank you. That's really helpful. And Richard, I guess, you know, if it's okay to come to you sort of from your more sort of personal experience, you know, sort of hearing Karen and Debbie there, I can see you nodding on a couple of occasions. What, if I may sort of ask, like, what was it like for you when sort of thinking about, actually, I'm going to need a bit of support here? How did you first come to think I might need something else?
yeah, for me, I think it came a little bit later, and as Debbie and Karen have said, that to start with, I think there is a stigma and a bit of, I don't know if there was shame, but probably a massive lack of understanding, unless you're kind of in a world with it. You see the news and you might think, oh, it's the celebrity thing, or people just wanting to be thin and not really understanding kind of behind it. So for me, I didn't get the support to start with, and it was only when my wife became seriously ill, was in hospital, that then I opened my eyes to how serious it was, and actually that I needed to do something about it as well. It wasn't just her problem and she needs to deal with it, and it was something that we were going to have to do together. And then accessing the support and the workshops and the information and all of that, and the therapy made such a difference, because it opened my eyes to how it manifests and what role I can play kind of in supporting it. And I think for lots of carers, people who are looking after them, parents, partners, it's, you want to help, and it's that lack of understanding of kind of how you can do that, and getting the help and the support you need to be able to support your partner or your loved one, whoever it might be, is really important.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about the level of sensitivity in that process, because, you know, as you said, sort of initially, perhaps, you know, there is the reality that you might not quite realize what's really going on here. You know, it seems like something that's probably going to be okay, or it's going to pass. And, you know, I've spoken to many parents and partners and loved ones over the years who've said, I can't believe I've missed it. You know, I just thought it was going to kind of be all right somehow, and what a fool. But actually you don't know what you don't know in the beginning, and you don't know where it's going to go, you know. And sometimes these are episodes in people's lives and they move through, but if we're in the realms of eating disorder, that's not what happens. And so that in itself is a really sort of difficult, and I think very brave thing, actually, to acknowledge that actually I think I'm going to need a bit of help here, that this is going to be my struggle as well as their struggle, and we're going to need to do this together. Feels important. Yeah. So I'm going to come to you again, Karen, if I may, just thinking about those sensitivities. There's a big debate, really, I guess, around, you know, how you step in, how you support, and when that support becomes kind of becoming maybe sort of overly involved, and you know, that in itself is a minefield. Like, what's the right thing to do here? I was speaking to a mother just earlier today saying, I don't want to step on their toes, but equally I feel I've got to bring something of what I'm seeing and say it, because otherwise I feel like I'm ignoring, you know, what's actually happening here. But how to do that in a way that allows that person to still feel seen and heard, and, you know, it's a tricky one.
It is, and because we're talking about partners, and because we know that these things happen in families, and we don't talk so much about what happened in partners. I think I'm going to speak from that perspective, really. And, you know, it's such a good question to think about that. There is this struggle for security, isn't it, in the relationship? You know, there is this struggle for power and control that takes place in a relationship. And there's something about sort of being secure in the relationship to be able to, move and acknowledge the struggle, that there's a struggle for security. And that can feel, I think, really exposing, if you like, to be able to say that's what's happening, the struggle for security within the relationship, around power and control as well. And we see it in so many different ways, you know. We see it in the way of perhaps that, you know, their loved one might be in charge of the food, and being able to give their partner a larger portion than they would take, you know. One, because, you know, there's something about, you know, not being able to see that it's a larger portion, but also in terms of, as I said, in terms of that power control, there's something around the the way in which the feelings then are displaced, I guess, onto the partner, you know. So you have either you have in the relationship is either going to be sort of rejecting and displacing those feelings on the other partner about how they feel, or there's going to be distancing, withdrawing. So we see all those things happening in that relationship. And again, there's that dance around that sort of power and control, really. And the possibility of, Richard, we talked about, Debbie talked about shame, you know, that displacement of shame onto the partner, rather than being able to process it themselves. And then, you know, without trying to be too stereotypical, you know, if we're looking at a heterosexual relationship, the male partner wants to be able to fix it, right, and take control of the situation. You know, that's sort of a high value, isn't it, in men, to be able to look after things and take care of it. But then when you have the distancing and displacement, you know, that feels very much a bit of a scary place, I guess, really, in terms of what's going on with our relationship when we have this power struggle that takes place. So there's something, for me, there's something about, you know, how do we are we able to have a conversation then that doesn't feel as though there is an enablement? Okay, so you're trying to be sensitive. So we know there are certain words that we can say. So you know, it looks like it's really hard for you today. You know, all those sensitive questions, and of course, someone might blow up at that. Of course, it's hard for me. You know, that displacement. You know, and maybe as a way of not being able to have the meal together. So, you know, the displacement goes on. So there's something about being able to sort of keep calm in that storm. Yeah. But also being able to articulate and describe what's happening. You know, when this normally happens and you say this, it means then that, you know, you storm off from the table, or we have an argument, and the reason why we're here together doesn't take place having this meal together. And I can see that's, you know, that's difficult for you. What can I do to help, or what do you need? So that sort of disarming can be, can't it, really, in terms of, you know, you could easily turn around and do the pointy fingers, you always do this. But actually you need to be able to take a different position, I guess, really. And then there is, you know, what is the avoidant behavior in terms of that relationship about? And, you know, if people are listening, as we said, this is affecting you, you know, you can step off. We know in eating disorders that there is a lot of sexual abuse that takes place, and we see a lot of clients who've been sexually abused. And I don't think we talk about that enough, really. Not about, you know, the fact that we need to talk about sexual abuse, but the fact that is, you know, that is a taboo subject. So people don't want to talk about that together, and then we use the food in a way to sort of restrict the feelings and also the talking, and shut themselves down. So there's something about being aware, the sensitivity of being aware of these things, that, you know, about what the underlying issue is, because as we said, it's not about food, is it? And then there is this thing again about the security, allowing the space and the relationship to have that security and the vision. So there's something about when people come together, you know, you have the vision about what your relationship is going to be like, what you're going to be doing 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. That's still part of your normal everyday experience as a couple. And I think that's really important, that you keep a hold of that, that in amongst all of the difficulty and challenge, that actually there is some normalcy in terms of why you've got together. And then there also is, you know, we think about family history on both sides, really. What have you got together? What is it that tacitly you are trying to heal with one another? There are sometimes similar backgrounds. It may not be about food, but it may be about just how people express themselves in family. One side of the family is really quiet, the other could be a bit more expressive, and so people have come together in order to feel whole. But behind that is, why is it so quiet? Because maybe things are a bit difficult and people didn't talk. Why are people so expressive? Because they were told to keep quiet about something and now they want to talk about it. So this power and control that takes place in a relationship, there is a reason behind it. And so coming together and being able to talk about, family history is an important way of working through what's underneath it all, I think.
Yeah, it's so important. And I was thinking as you were talking, Karen, about the very unique dynamics that happen in any relationship. That there are so many complexities to any couple. When we put that in the context of an eating disorder, it brings in this other sort of aspect. And I think you've talked about a lot of very important things there. The fact that this other thing, this entity, sometimes it almost feels like another being arrives in a couple's relationship, and it impacts so many different levels of the couple's life together, whether it's issues around intimacy, whether it's issues around sex, whether it's issues around like how we spend time together, the things that we do together, the things that we talk about, the places that we go. It can really impact every different aspect of your life, and can feel, I think, as you said there, and I could really resonate with that, that feeling of like 5 years, 10 years, these are normal things that couples do together that can feel very, very sort of interrupted and intersected by an eating disorder, because life can suddenly feel very, very uncertain. And I was just wondering, sort of, Debbie, as you were sort of listening to this, this question around, so what do we do when we think about just how complex this is, and we want to, approach somebody that we love and care about in a way like, Karen was saying, we might meet the finger of, you always do this, or, just back off, this isn't your place, you're not my mother, or you're not my father, or, and I imagine you've encountered this sort of supporting people over the years. What comes up for you hearing that?
Yeah, I mean, it is so difficult, isn't it? And I think there are very clear distinctions in that parent relationship versus the partner one, because, going back to a situation where someone's in a couple, it feels like there's more to lose when you want that loving, intimate relationship. It's not, the parental relationship is one that can result in, tonight is going to be another slamming of doors, and then, we'll get school bags ready tomorrow. I mean, that, very generalization of a parent-child relationship. But when you're a partner and you still want to be going to bed with that person, and you still want to be dreaming about marrying that person, having a child with that person in 5 years' time, you don't want to be turning down the dinner date that you agreed to for the 5th time with the couple that yet again are your best friends, but you keep turning down, and that it's because of your wife or your husband's eating disorder that you keep having to make the same excuses. It's all those things that make those layers of kind of, just complexity around how do you manage it when it isn't such a straightforward, I'm the adult in this, you must do this. And so, but the thing that we're always sort of very mindful of is approaching somebody and tackling it. It just is so dependent on the individual, because for some people they'll retreat. For some people they will go silent. Some people don't want to do conflict and they'll just retreat into themselves. And what I'm always sort of saying to families is, don't forget that the one way this eating disorder wins is by forcing that person to retreat. Because who else has they got for company, for love, for affection? They've got the eating disorder. It is like having a row with somebody who you think is having an affair, and actually you're having a row with them so much. What are you doing? You're forcing them into the arms of the person that you least want them to be in the arms of. And I think sometimes when we fall apart as a family with an eating disorder in the mix, that's what we do. We force that person to become more wedded to the very thing that we need to separate them from. So the power of our conversation and that gentle coming in between. And it's always about kind of how can I gently nudge the gap to widen the gap between the eating disorder and the person I love. And also, I suppose the other thing I'd say, Kerry, is, it's so important to remind yourself that your loved one, whether they are your wife, your husband, your partner, your child, is not the eating disorder. This person that you see in the bad episodes, at the times when they're finding it really tough, and the arguments that you have, that doesn't take away from the fact that you fell in love with that person, that beautiful, happy person. But unfortunately, they're battling with the demons of an illness, and that shifts how their personality behaves. And I know, other people kind of, listen to this must be thinking, God, yes, but it feels like real Jekyll and Hyde. And really, you have got to look at it as two different personalities, but not get caught up in, as you say, that kind of, you always do this. Here we go again, and kind of making them the sum total of their eating disorder. The job to do is to separate them from the defining of that eating disorder.
I think it's such an important message to hold, isn't it? And it's, just sometimes hearing that, sort of having that reassurance that someone else has seen this, that, you're not the only person to whom this has happened, can be incredibly helpful. And I think then having resources, people, whether it's a group, whether it's something to read on the internet, can be so helpful. There's something that you said there that I think I feel is really important. And I guess one of the feelings that often we encounter in relationships is this feeling of resentment and anger. And I think it's a very uncomfortable area to talk about, because I guess, and again, having worked with lots of people, they'll say, like, I know that this person is ill, I know they're unwell. Some part of me recognizes that this is not the person that I met, fell in love with, gave birth to, whichever context you're in that. However, they are behaving in this way now, and I am having feelings about it. And it's a really complex area, because often people will struggle with, well, if it were a broken leg, if it were a medical diagnosis, how would I be feeling? And the reality is, on some days you may still feel a bit fed up, irritated, resentful, but somehow because of the complexity of the illness, that can make that very difficult to name and say, yes, actually, I feel really fed up with this right now. And it feels important to acknowledge. And, I don't want to put anybody on the spot here, but, I wonder if any of you have a particularly strong feeling about that.
But I think sometimes, it can be one of those things where it can almost exist in almost quite a dormant way, so that the mood can stay quite stable. And then from what I hear from partners and parents, is often it's that moment where yet again we're turning down an invitation to something because I know we can't go because it involves food, or I had to go food shopping on my own and I adore food, but yet again I'm just making the meal for myself, and that breaks my heart because I love to cook. And those things, those kind of out of the blue moments, can just, where you, like you use the word kind of bitterness, resentment, whatever, it can just be the thing that lights the kind of paper that night, and it just sets the flames going. And it's the anger that says, why do we have to live with this? Why is this illness destroying our relationship, whether that's the parent-child relationship or the partner relationship? And then other times it probably is that quiet, compassionate acceptance that my loved one is really poorly, and I know that they're not doing this to destroy us.
Yeah. Richard, were you about to say something as well?
Yeah, it's similarly that it is really difficult, and from my own experience, I think as a partner, there's almost a sense of guilt when you're feeling angry about it. You feel like I shouldn't be. I know they're ill, and I know that they can't help it, and they're not doing it on purpose. But like you said, the behaviours and things you see, they do make it difficult, and they are normal feelings to have. And I think what works for us and for me was, like we've talked about before, separating the eating disorder and the person, and we almost labelled them as a different person in relationship. So I love you, and I still love you, and that's the security that my wife needed, because I think the eating disorder is always there in the back of her mind, saying, you know, that he's going to leave you and he doesn't want you and you're not good enough and all of those things. So you reassure the person, but we could then label the behaviours and the eating disorder as, this is what's making me angry, you know, and I find this bit difficult. And yeah, there will be times when they won't hear it and they won't want to hear it, and you'll get the negative reaction. But again, it's for us, what worked was the reassurance that that's okay. That's not going to mean that I'm going to leave or I'm going to go or anything. I still love you. But yeah, then you do need to be able to express how you're feeling, and it comes right back to what we were talking about at the start, about looking after yourself. And I can hold my hands up. Honestly, at the start, I didn't open up, and I bottled everything up, and I was like, I've got to pretend like everything's fine and I'm okay, and this isn't angering me, and everything's smooth. And actually, that eats away at you as a partner, and as someone who you need to be able to look after and care for someone. And if you're not able to talk openly and honestly and with them, then that becomes really difficult. And yeah, I think it was a kind of a turning point for me, was when we were able to have those kind of more honest conversations. And yeah, obviously the way we talked about it, and like I said, in labelling the eating disorder as the other person that's making this difficult, rather than, you know, saying it's you and you're doing it and you're the problem. Actually, this is what the problem is, and it's making our relationship difficult. I found really helpful. And also, yeah, not just in our relationship, but for me personally, being able to kind of express my feelings and how it's affecting me and other people as well. Obviously, as the partner, but also family and people like that, you know, they can also share how they're feeling, because I think there's nothing worse than just kind of holding on to something. You said that resentment grows, and then it can become quite a difficult thing to manage within the relationship.
Yeah. Thank you for being so open. I really value hearing that, and I think, you know, I really respect your courage actually to say that, because I think it's such an uncomfortable area, but it is the reality that sometimes, you know, nobody's perfect. You know, who knew? And actually, it's the imperfection often that leads to recovery. So it's, you know, the anger, it's the moments when I shouldn't have said it, but I did, you know, it came out, and then we could get real. Then we could really start to talk. And Karen and I have worked together for a very long time. And I can think of many occasions, Karen, where, you know, we've felt it's going to come, you know, it's got to come. And it's in that process that it actually allows for, you know, the something to start to connect and for that movement to come through.
Absolutely. And, you know, there was a couple of things I was thinking as we were talking as well. So for those people who also have a faith, who might be listening to this and listening to the rewind as well, I think when Debbie was talking about, you know, the demons within, it was more a characteristic, just to be clear, rather than a possession. So I think that's important to say to people who are listening, because you know, often people may think that that is the case. Yeah. So that's so I just want to clarify that for people who are listening as well, that the characteristic of the eating disorder and the behaviour, which then impacts people's relationships, can feel very hard and very distancing, and very painful and very scary. And I think when people use the term, you know, the demons within, it's that's scary, that feeling of and not unrecognizable, that their loved one is unrecognizable in those moments, which I think Richard was talking about, really. But the part of them that they do love. And I think as Kerry was saying, that the processes of being incredibly courageous and brave to engage in conversations that then just get you know, disconnected, I guess, really from the eating disorder to allow the reality of what is underneath, you know, what is being masked, I guess, really by the eating disorder, can feel very scary for everybody. Will I fall apart? Will the family, will my husband, my wife never speak to me again? Will they leave me? And often we find, and I think that's the sensitivity of the work that we do, is that people may have a sense of something dreadful may have happened to that person, and you know, but not wanting to say because it could feel too horrific to say, you know, the unknown. And so, you know, working very sensitively allows the unsaid to become spoken.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, and in that brokenness, the eating disorder, what it has been masking is unearthed. And so, you know, the fear is going to run back into the disorder and withdraw, or what do I need now? Once it's out, nobody can remain the same. You can't remain the same. There is only one way forward now because it's been unmasked. And with the same courage and sensitivity, everybody can come along and take their time and work through these processes. Yeah. If I'm not speaking in code, we've talked quite openly and candidly about some of the more about many areas that are unsaid and taboo, that we, as Kerry said, that we have worked with very closely. It's really important that, you know, one can work through this and come out the other side as well, and let go of all that. So that's one of the things I was going to say, really. I don't know what else was I going to say. I think that's sort of around that, really, in terms of being able to then move into some of that more normal eating habit, and the partner not feeling held to ransom by the behaviours of the eating disorder. You can then disentangle them. And one of the other things that I think Debbie was talking about was, you know, being not able to go out and do things. Here then is an opportunity to find a different way of an adjustment. It may be that, you know, one partner goes out and the other person decides they're going to go and meet them there and then decide how long they might stay. So all these things can be healed and people can move through them, and you can develop and adjust to a different type of life that you had experienced before.
Absolutely. I guess one of the areas that comes up when all of you have spoken actually is perhaps what happens in a relationship when there's an eating disorder is often there's a lot of control that gets experienced, and that control can be both when somebody is becoming unwell or is unwell and it's sort of undefined and nobody quite knows what's happening. But there can also be an experience of feeling quite controlled by someone's recovery as well. You know, I've spoken a lot with people about saying, you know, it's all very well that we've now got this menu plan and there's 6 eating opportunities a day and I'm completely committed to it and I totally get it, but it's incredibly difficult to live your life with. And you know, it was an example once actually of a couple going to a friend's wedding, and they were just trying to navigate this, and it felt almost impossible. And they were saying, I just don't think we're going to go, because they just didn't quite know how to get around it. And actually, with a bit of thought and preparation, we were able to think about. But you know, that control and that rigidity that we meet sort of when the illness is really prevalent in a very negative sense can also be there when we're trying to sort of navigate recovery in a healthy sort of minded sense. So I was thinking about what causes resentment and anger and bitterness and frustration can sometimes be this sense that I'm not able to say what I want, do what I want, go where I want, etc. And I was just wondering, Richard, if that's something that you recognised or have had experience of talking with other people in a similar situation about.
Yeah, it was really difficult. I think to start with, like when Vicky, my wife, was ill, it was I think there was less resentment then. It was kind of more worry and care and look after. And then for me, if I'm honest, the resentment more came later on. Like when she was in recovery, I found that transition really difficult. I think I was still in kind of carer mode, so I was worrying about every meal and every all the time she didn't text back, and I would panic about things because I hadn't recovered, whereas she had, and she was in a much better place than I was, and I became resentful of her living her life and doing all the things she should be doing because I was still stuck panicking and worrying about her eating disorder and would she relapse and would there be anything that's going on, and I found that really challenging, and again something that I didn't talk openly and honestly about to start with. Again, it was bottling it up that was hard, and then I found it really challenging. That was probably the most difficult time throughout all of it for me, was kind of the first few months of her recovery and her getting back to her normal life was really difficult for me because I wasn't there yet, and just not knowing how to talk about it. And I think as we've probably said all throughout, just being able to be open and honest and talk about those things and the reassurance and made such a difference. And I feel I'm rambling, but it was it was really difficult, and actually for me getting like help and support externally was really important, and it kind of made me understand who I was as a person and what I look for in a relationship, and all of that was really important for me to kind of identify within myself why I was hanging on to these things when Vicky wasn't, and she was able to move on.
It's such an important part of the recovery process that we often overlook, because I think the individual has the benefit of knowing what's going on in their head. Previously you've had this expectation that what's going on in this person's head, broadly speaking, and it's transpired that you really didn't know what was going on. And so it's very, very destabilizing to find yourself in that situation. And I think for a lot of people who are coming alongside someone, they are in deficit, they're playing catch up all the way through. So to hear you sort of recognize actually that's exactly when it started to feel like, oh, hang on a minute, and actually there's another part of that, I think, which is when we start to see the person's health returning, perhaps some of those feelings of frustration, of anger, of just how on earth could you are sort of safer actually to go to. We can't go to those places when we're in the crisis, when we're in survival mode. We don't have the capacity. So it is later, I think, when actually things feel safer, ironically, that those feelings are able to start to surface. I think it's such an important thing to acknowledge and to be able to name here.
And I think as well, there's something about, when you're in a relationship or in a marriage, and part of that process is to grow, even if you didn't have any disorder. So when somebody is in recovery and starting to grow and move on, the other person is still held back. And that space where they should have grown, they're holding those boundaries that have kept the security safe. And so there's something about their own identity that then has to make an adjustment, and they have to get to know themselves outside of the eating disorder that's been part of that relationship.
Yeah, for sure. I think, whatever age somebody is, when they recover from an eating disorder, there is a personality change and, or just differences in behaviors and in sort of persona. And that's a challenge for the person going through it, but also the person that's been waiting alongside, knowing that person and the true self has been there all along, but kind of watching it happen is kind of, well, where do I fit? And And actually, in a way, Rich, I guess, you know, sometimes we hear from people where the tables get almost reversed, where at one point the person experiencing the eating disorder and in moments of distress says, but you'll leave me, you know, I'm going to end up on my own. And then as that person gets well again, that kind of partner is then thinking, well, now is the personality changed so much she's going to think differently about me? And what does that say about me? Will she still need me? And if I'm not a carer, what am I now? And am I as important as I was then? Because now she's got so many more social invitations. And she, you know, it just, all these things that you've been waiting to celebrate, your person coming back to full health and well-being, are moments of fear in a strange way.
Yeah, it's these nuances. Did you want to come in, Richard? You were nodding.
No, I was just going to agree. Yeah, that's how it was. That yeah, you have those feelings that you are the carer, and that's how I identified for a number of years, because that's what my role was, or I felt it was within the relationship. And then when that went, then you do have the panic as to, are they going to need me anymore? Do they want me? What was it convenient because I looked after them, and now they're going to move on with their lives and find something else? So yeah, it was. I think, as everyone said, that's the trickiest part. I think for a partner, obviously.
And perhaps sometimes it's a bit like in an odd way, almost like when you know someone's grieving because they've lost someone, we rush to them when they just first tell you that somebody in their family has died or whatever, and right up until the funeral we're there like supporting them and saying, oh, this is so awful for you. And then in the weeks that pass, we think that person should surely be getting over it, and that kind of somehow they need less compassion and support. But actually it can be the next birthday or the next Christmas without that person is when they really need that love and support. And I think maybe there's a kind of requirement there to remember that the people that are the carers, actually for them that journey continues well into recovery, and it's kind of their continuing to need to remind themselves who they are, what their identity is, and almost the table flips around, kind of needing to say, we need to check in with one another just to say, and I love you too, you know, and we may have been there and we may have been this couple before, but we're even better now. And just, I guess, just kind of voicing that need to remind each other.
Yeah, I think there can be, you know, during the course of a recovery and you know, a descent into the illness, so many changes that happen from, you know, as we said earlier, you know, maybe even just the things you talk about, like, you know, what can be a very normal comment, I put that in inverted commas, you know, in a relationship when both people are well, you know, oh, you look really nice tonight, or, oh, you've got lovely color in your cheeks today, which, you know, can feel like a real compliment to somebody who, when they're unwell, becomes something that's a real sort of fearful thing to hear, that it's a trigger, that it awakens a fearful part of them. Then when that person's back in recovery, and I remember having a conversation with a couple and saying, but I haven't been allowed to tell you look nice in a dress for ages. And her saying, but I want you to now. And he was just like, I don't know which way is up right now. And I just remember in that moment this, and she got it and he got it, and it was a really important moment, and they were able to kind of really think about it. But it's those little, what feel like really little subtle things that actually are so important. Another example I had was sharing bags of crisps. So these had been banished for a long period of time, but now they were allowed back in the home. And, you know, this partner not quite knowing what to do about that. Like, do I get one out? Do I put it on the sofa? Like, where should it go? You know, and again, I think of your point, Richard, which I think is so vital. Like, how do we talk about this then? Because like, I've got this, you know, big bag of giant Wotsits and I don't quite know what to do with it. You know? But it's important because these really subtle things will get interrupted in the course of the evolution of the eating disorder. And of course, those are like little microcosms of the things that are going on emotionally, those sensitivities, those intimacies that are happening in a relationship that get interrupted. And there is something about having the courage to talk about them and having the support, the safety and the spaces to really talk about those things.
And I think when we think about other types of family, we've talked about where one person, I'm just looking at the time when we have one person in the relationship who has an eating disorder or recovery disorder. What happens when both have, you know, we are very experienced around that area as well. We've seen that many a times as well. you know, how do the couple renegotiate their relationship with one another, and if there are children as well, how, you know, how do they then talk about their values, their new values, that's changed, because everybody again is having to make an adjustment. So it is a challenge. People do take risks in trying to find solutions to the disconnections that they've had with one another, and around, you said, that power and control, in order to have a happier life, a happier family, and also to think about what changes the next generation need to make in order to have a healthy way of being together, I guess, really.
I'm mindful as you are that we've got about 8 minutes left, and we had some questions that came in sort of prior to the webinar, and there were things around exercise actually, which I thought might be quite useful for us just to spend a few minutes on, because you know, I think this can be a really complicated area again. Quite often in families and in couples, you know, sharing an interest in a sport can be something that a family has done together, or you know, a couple does together, and sometimes it can be, you know, a dance pursuit, or as you say, it can be really sort of embedded into somebody's, the sort of culture of that relationship, of that family. And I guess it would be interesting, and Debbie, I might come to you just to sort of start us off, if that's okay. Like, you know, when these things happen, that when these sort of happens and these things get interrupted again, I'm just sort of thinking about how do you support people with maybe approaching that or thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, it is really challenging. In fact, only the other week I was talking to a guy that we're helping, and he and his wife always used to do the park run together. And unfortunately, what started out as a bit of kind of, you know, the light exercise that they were doing together, and she had a very healthy relationship with food, but sadly kind of became, you know, developed an eating disorder. And while she was trying to recover, her approach to it was to say, well, you know, if I'm not allowed to go to park run, then you're not allowed to go. I don't want to hear that you're going. I don't want to hear that you're going out the house to do it, because you're doing it just to make me feel worse about myself. And there was just an almighty row that was guaranteed every weekend if he was to do the pursuit that equally made him happy. So he was sort of saying to me, I've just curtailed it because it's just, but I'm losing out. And as much as anything, he didn't really do it because he was desperate to do a 5K. He did it because, like anybody that's ever done something like that, it's the community, isn't it? And so he felt like he was losing his social opportunity, and yet at the same time he lost the opportunity to do something that he really looked forward to doing with his wife. So, you know, everybody loses in many respects, because, you know, but at the same time, I think it is really important to have that conversation and not to pretend. I've seen other couples where they say, well, I sneak out the house and I don't tell my wife that I'm actually going to go to the gym after work, and, you know, I don't let her see that I'm packing a bag because I don't want the exercise issue to come up. But I think the more it gets driven underground, then actually it leaves the other person thinking, is he doing this, and is that? And then, you know, God almighty, if it ever comes out that he's been seen by somebody else at the gym, and then you lied to me, and I, you know, why would I bother to do what I'm told to do? So it's a really challenging one. But I think it is, and we've said this all along, that it is really important that you know, that carer, that partner, that parent has to continue to live their life too. We have to be really mindful of that, because that's what breeds resentment, and in the worst cases, resentment does lead to breakdowns of relationships, and then you know, everybody's flailing and at a loss. So I think wherever possible, it's important that that person is able to continue their own life. And yeah, all right, sadly, you know, there's going to be levels of their activity and output, and, you know, behaviors that they do in everyday life that might have to be moderated, respectful of the fact that the person they love is recovering and isn't going to want to talk about or hear or be made highly aware of what they're doing. But, you know, at the same time, you can't expect somebody just to turn the dial off on things that are really important to them too. And I don't know, Rich, whether you went through any of that, but it is, I think, part of leaving that person able to have their own identity too.
Yeah, it became challenging for us. I made the mistake and I did give up my exercise I did it for about 3 or 4 weeks, but by the end of that had taken a massive toll on me and my ability to just function as a person, really. Like it was one of the key things in my life, and not being able to do that was really difficult. What I found worked for me and for Vicky was when we talked about the eating disorder as an illness, the same way if you had a broken leg or something, you might not be able to do the same exercise you used to be able to do before because you've got this injury, this illness. So that's why you're not doing it, and that kind of talking about it that way enabled me to kind of be able to carry on because I don't have that injury, that problem. But whilst you're still recovering, then we might have to like modify what you're doing, and until you are in a place where you can do it the same way you would with any other kind of injury or ailment in that sense. So it worked to an extent. I know, again, with the nature of eating disorders, there's ups and downs, and Vicky wasn't open about kind of resentment to me, but it's more, I guess, the secrecy around what she would be doing. She might sneak out and do runs and things like that. But I think like Debbie said, in the long run, just being open and honest about it, and you don't have to kind of flaunt it and rub it in people's faces, but hiding it, I think, and the secrecy just makes all of it much more difficult and puts much more strain on the relationship.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And again, I was just thinking about how this translates into the food as well. And we're going to have to close in just a minute, but I think it's a very similar process. And there's something about, I think Debbie said this right at the beginning, there's something about an eating disorder that sort of presents itself in a way where it has this immense ability to control everything that is around it. If you thought about it in any other context, I don't know, let's say that someone gets, I don't know, a diagnosis of a food allergy, for example, and so I'm allergic to kiwi fruit. So, I might say to people, "Oh, could you not cut that kiwi fruit near me?" And they go, "Yeah, that's fine." But I wouldn't be like, "Don't ever bring a kiwi fruit into," But there's something about an eating disorder which has this immense power to control, like far and wide, that people who are coming to your house for dinner will be prepared to come to the house, and they'll have thought about what they're going to say, let alone, the people who are living in the house. And so whether it's exercise, whether it's, going out clothes shopping, whether it's going on holiday, etc., it can have this incredible ability to set the scene and to dominate the scene. And so I think hearing you there, Richard, it feels like a really kind of helpful place to sort of reflect as we end, to say that there is something about needing, and we talk a lot about kind of just checking in with reality, asking yourself the question, why am I going for this run? Am I going for this run to make you feel bad? And, in Debbie's sort of example, it's very unlikely that somebody is motivated by, I want to cause this person more hurt and more harm. So actually being really clear for yourself about, I want to go for a run because I enjoy it and it keeps me well and healthy. I want to go out for dinner with those friends because I enjoy their company. And actually, I think it would be really good for me right now. And actually being really confident in your own narrative internally, so that if you do get the challenge, or what might sometimes feel like the attack, you can hold yourself in that and know where you are in it. And I think that's a really, really important sort of takeaway, really. And appreciate you, Richard, being so very, very open with your sort of experiences around that. So thank you. So I'm going to have to bring us to a close. I always think at the beginning, we've got an hour, and then at the end I think, my gosh, we had an hour. So Debbie, Richard and Karen, thank you so much for your time this evening, and for sharing your knowledge and your experiences. Richard, I really, really deeply thank you, because I think it's always so helpful and so important for people to hear directly from somebody who's lived it, and recognize it does really take a lot of courage, and we're very grateful for you for coming and stepping into this evening. So someone's expressing their thanks through the Q&A. So well, hopefully our paths will cross and we will talk again. But for now, big thanks, and I hope that you all go on to have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.